everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today to hear a little bit more about talent management concerns that organizations experience today. I will now turn it over to David Cohen, and then we'll go on to how technology can help meet your needs. David, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me just share a little bit of information, what we're going to talk about today. And first, a little bit about myself. I've been in the consulting work for about 33 years. Prior to that, I was about 15 years in education. I worked my way up in a number of private schools through headmaster. And after the one I was working with in Toronto, I decided I had enough of parents, loved kids. School was great, but parents drove me nuts. I made the transition to consulting, started my own business in 1991, have worked with organizations around the world in every aspect of talent management, have a large focus recently on the employee experience around corporate values, leadership, and how to integrate those into all talent management aspects. And today we'll be discussing just one of those. I've written 2 books. The Talent Edge is about how to write behavioral competencies and apply that to structured behavioral interviewing. And Inside the Box is about corporate values, leadership, and business ethics, and how that gets integrated into various talent management activities. Been a Raptors fan a long time. On the right is my younger son, Gil, and on the left is my oldest grandson, Ezra, and that was at the first game of the season this year. To begin, I'd like to just ask the group a few questions as a base. We use performance reviews in your organization. Just answer these for yourself. We use performance reviews in our organization primary way to identify high potentials. In other words, do you use the content of the performance review as part of the decision-making process for high potentials? That will be addressed later on. Our managers give completely honest performance reviews. In other words, do your managers give brutally honest performance reviews? And are they able to tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear? There is usually an overlap between current job skills, knowledge, behaviors, education, etc., and behaviors of the high potential employees' future roles. Some organizations, people are moved into completely new roles with completely new job descriptions and behavioral responsibilities, and sometimes it's a continuation, which is the case in your organization. Our managers, not HR, are required to develop the hypos. In other words, it is the manager's responsibility to identify and find people that can become future leaders in the organization, and their responsibility is to take them on that development path to be successful. Not at all. In other words, HR does it all the time, infrequently, mostly, always. We use 360 feedback and psychometric testing tools as part of the identification and development of high potentials. Yes, you use it sometimes. No, we never use those. So here's the thing. Given those questions as sort of a context of what we're doing right now, how many of the companies surveyed by Deloitte through the performance reviews thought that performance reviews were a waste of time? Now, this goes back to the question, do you use performance reviews as part of your hypo identification? So what percentage of those that they surveyed think performance reviews are a waste of time? Well, only 6% say it's a waste of time. So far, so good. Let's look at the next slide. What percentage of your employees with high performance reviews scores are actually your highest performers? So of 100% of your employees, what percentage of those who are identified as high performers and therefore get into the high potential pool are really high performers? Only 33%. In other words, how useful are performance reviews? So let me take you through this process, and this is the roadmap that we're going to have today. Identification of high potential, what is it? High potential versus a high performer. So I want to differentiate. There are people who are high performers that either by self-selection do not desire to move on to new roles, or are high performers, but have never shown the interest, the capability to actually move forward, so they should remain as high performers. Bias in the identification of hypos. One of the questions is, can you overcome bias? And will bias training help you overcome bias? The research on that is pretty clear. The answer is no. And the last part, cost-effective means of employee development. So once you identify a high potential and you have the pool, how can you, in these times where budgets are constrained, to do it in a way that doesn't really cost the organization money? And there are plenty of those that are available. Now, why is this so important? In a survey that was conducted for CEOs around the globe, there were 1,500 of them responded to a survey. If you notice the ones in white, they all deal with people and making sure that they have the ability to be able to focus on the future of the organization through people. So this is a really important question. And the one thing which I have learned through trial and error and working with clients is leadership must provide a clear statement of what is a high potential. In other words, I'm not going to know it when I see it. And a high potential employee is not an individual who simply gets good results. And why is that? Because the way I understand it, or people are hired for their technical knowledge, for their background, education, and experience, are promoted because of their performance, results, and are fired for their interpersonal behaviors. So unless the senior management team, in particular the CEO, has a means of measuring what future success looks like, it's not going to be possible to identify high potentials with any consistency. And that consistency really has to come from the senior management, because you're going to build people across the organization. So being successful in, let's say, transportation, or being successful in finance cannot be a different set of behaviors for senior positions than in other roles. This needs to be one consistent, either leadership profile that identifies the right behaviors for a future leader in the organization, or as we did with one organization, Massachusetts General Hospital, and a few other organizations, we identified what were the behavioral characteristics, behavioral attributes that led to people's success. So there was a identification of the behavioral competencies that people demonstrate when they are in fact successfully identified as high potentials and move to more senior roles. So there needs to be that ability to build the right talent model. Having the common characteristics, therefore, is necessary to have the outcome that drive the desired ability for the organization to be successful. Because while you have, hopefully, the behavioral competency statements for your values, which are critical in order to identify high potentials. Let me just pause a second and emphasize this. If you promote or identify as a high potential an employee because they're getting good results or their manager likes them, that others do not perceive as living the values, you have killed your employee experience with that identification of one person. And only one person being identified as gotten away with, not having to be like everybody else, will kill the entire high potential identification process. So without having a common understanding of what is behavior and how that behavior is demonstrated in the workplace, you leave it open for multiple interpretations. And that reason is there's often a confusion between what is a behavior and what is an outcome. Let me try to be clear on this. Organizations say they have behavioral profiles, and that's good. But when I examine them, in many cases, if not most, they have words in there that immediately identify it's not behavioral, it's an outcome. An outcome simply is the ability to communicate, the ability to persuade, the ability to make a presentation, the ability to lead a team. So let's say I take communications, and it says demonstrates the ability to communicate well with others. That's great. But my question is, within the context of your culture of your organization, the history of your organization, how people actually motivate others and get their message across, what's the right means of communication? That would be the behavior. So if I were working in an organization, especially working across time zones, that the right mean might be I go on WhatsApp. Before I do that, I go to Grammarly. I type the message I want to put in there. I make sure it's spelled correctly, grammatically correct, everything else. I copy it, paste it into WhatsApp, and I send it out. But it's 3 o'clock in the morning because I woke up with the understanding that there was something I wanted to communicate with people. And I do this all the time. And now I have people waking up at 4 in the morning to check their messages so they can be the first to reply. And if you're a multinational organization, and this is what I ran into in Singapore with one of my clients, one of the cosmetic companies, the New York office was sending WhatsApp messages because there's a 12-hour difference at 3 in the afternoon, expecting a response by 5. So communication clearly for them was never really defined, but they had in their behavioral profile clearly communicates with others. So instead of it being an outcome, it needs to be a behavior, such as allows people to provide their input before offering a response. So you can actually visualize somebody sitting there patiently waiting for a response before they respond. Now, the question then becomes, how do I measure? How do I measure a behavior? And the answer to that is not how well the person does it. And that's one of the flaws with many feedback systems. They say, how well does the person demonstrate this behavior? I can do it by mistake once. I can do it because my boss is just watching, and therefore I get a good score. Reality is, given the number of times one had to demonstrate that behavior, how frequently they do it correctly. So if I did it last week correctly once, but 10 times before that never did it, I deserve the lowest possible score and needs improvement. So if we're going to understand the usage of behaviors, whether it's for behavioral interviewing, whether it's for performance management, check-in conversations, or whether it's for identification of high potentials, whether it's for development of employees around behaviors, the measurement of demonstrating that behavior successfully is based on frequent demonstrations and recent demonstrations. So with that as background, let me give you some information on what are we talking about. We need to have, and these are the components that go into the identification of the profile for a high potential. Who are we? What do we stand for? What's our ethical stand? So there's our values. In addition to our values, there's a skill and knowledge needed for more senior positions. In other words, we might get along with everybody and live the values, but we don't have the knowledge to do the job. So there's also that ability to do the job. So there's values, ability, and then there's the company-specific leadership behaviors. What are the behaviors for that specific role? So when I was doing this, for instance, with the Calgary Police Service, we did profiles for each level of the service. Constable, detective, they're the same level, sergeant, staff sergeant, all the way up to chief. And every time we moved up the ladder, we never repeated the behaviors because the theory is once you have the behavior and demonstrated it, you can call upon it. So you really only have to identify the behaviors required for that job. So by having that, you really can create a model that says these are the things we are going to measure each individual against in order to have them be identified as a high performer, high potential, or not even performing that well. So if you reflect for a moment and define for yourself your organization's model, how do you define in your organization a high potential? What is the definition of a high potential that you're measuring people against in your organization? Hopefully you've thought about that. An employee who is capable of rising to and succeeding at a more senior or critical role. In other words, somebody who has already demonstrated some of the characteristics, attributes associated with a role that is either in a different division but parallel to their own, or a more senior role. An employee's potential, therefore, is defined in three ways: personal aspiration, functional ability, and their level of engagement. So let me break those down. Aspiration. Does the employee want to be promoted? What does that mean? What are the questions we have to identify in order to understand that this person has aspirations? Do they want more prestige? They want greater recognition, visibility in the organization. Are they interested in advancement and greater influence? And I say that because there are many roles, many times that I've run into in organizations and speaking with employees, they actually don't want to be promoted. There are many, for instance, constables that I've worked with in various police services that love being constables. And they go for promotion only 2 or 3 years before their retirement because they're going to get retirement package based on the highest role that they had in the service. I was working in a financial institution a number of years back, and they had a entry-level supervisor who was very talented, and they saw as very high potential, and was doing the jobs associated and making contributions associated with many more roles other than her own. And they had offered her high potential and even promotion. A number of times she always turned it down, and I asked her why. And when the opportunity came up, and she said, my husband and I both work. It's about an hour to work each day. We have little kids. Our combined income is a very healthy income. And I like being able to get my kids off to school and not having to be in before 9 o'clock. And I like being able to leave at 4:30, 4:45 to catch the train back home by 5 o'clock. And if they ask me one more time to take another job, which would cause me to be in early or stay late or take more work home, I'm going to find a new job somewhere else. And she said, so I said, well, when might you be interested, therefore, in that development role? And she said, in about 10 years, when her youngest is a sophomore in high school. So we have to understand what their aspiration is. Do they want more money? Do they want a different, level of income? Are they open to changes in their work-life balance? This one individual was not. And they are overall job enjoyment. In other words, they really enjoy what they do and they love, which is tied to the next one. And then there's the ability. Does the employee have the skills, knowledge, behaviors, and always live the firm's values necessary to succeed in different and more complex or senior roles? What does that deal with? Is that they have the innate characteristics? Do they have the mental and cognitive ability? Do they have the emotional intelligence? And do they have the behaviors for roles? And have they learned skills? Have they learned previously? And I'll talk about learning agility in a second, because many organizations use that also as high potential identification. And so I'll give you my perspective on that in a few minutes. And that was the one that's the most interesting, and that's engagement. Is the employee happy at the company? What does that mean? Do they want to stay there? Do they consistently speak positively about the organization to coworkers and potential coworkers and customers? Do they have the emotional intelligence for those other roles? Do they therefore have an intense desire to be part of the organization? And do they provide extra effort? In other words, engagement isn't that they scored on answering the questionnaire on the engagement score high, plus the fact you don't know what individuals have scored it. And so since they're averages, and sometimes averages of averages, what you have to understand is that even if their group is highly engaged, you can't assume that the individual you're talking about is that engaged person. Now, it's a discussion for another time and another place, but engagement surveys really only have to have 5 questions. And those 5 questions quickly are, do I respect my boss? Do I feel respected by my boss and to my boss? Do I trust my boss? Do I trust senior leadership? And the 5th question, which goes to discretionary effort, is, considering the last 3 months, have I consistently done all possible things to be successful all the time? The answer is no to any of those. They're not engaged. I don't care what the survey is. So the confluence of a high, or identification of a high potential, is the confluence between aspiration, engagement, and ability. So the question is, what about learning agility? So learning agility is simply defined as the ability and willingness to learn new things, to learn from our experiences, to see things for the first time and understand them and find out about them. So that's learning agility, but that's really just learning. My doctorate is in education, curriculum design, and organizational behavior. And basically, learning is a behavior of changing our understanding of the environment in which we live. So a change in behavior on a very simple level is when a child knows that 1 and 1 is 2, you've changed their understanding of their universe. So a change in behavior is simple. Understanding things differently than you did before. Now, that's learning. Learning agility is proven to be a strong predictor of performance and promotability. That is something that a lot of consultants talk about. They say, okay, we know that. Now, here's my question for you. If that person has worked for your organization for 3, 4, or more years, you've already seen in real time whether they're able to be put into new situations, learn new technology, and adapt to it or not. So you already know that. And part of the framework for use is cross-validation, meaning identifying if they are high potential. In other words, a high potential person has learning agility. I would accept that, but I don't think a test is going to tell you that. The only thing that's going to tell you that is real life experiences. Has this person adapted to new things? Has this person embraced change? Has this person helped other people embrace change, embrace doing things differently? If not, putting them in a new role isn't going to be too successful, even if, in fact, they have some of the other characteristics such as engagement and aspiration. The one aspect that I did talk about, the third one, is going to be missing. So putting this into perspective, the hypos give you the ability to be successful in VUCA times. Behavior-based guidance for supervisors is required, I believe, in making sure that you're able to identify high potentials with consistency. Having your management team consistently understand what are the behaviors and what those behaviors look like in your organization within your culture. And again, building a framework, it's a high potential versus a high performer. Is a high potential is a person who frequently demonstrates the capabilities associated with other roles and applies that learning even in their current role in order to be successful. So it's frequency and application of that learning. A high performer, therefore, is a person who's achieving their goals, consistently demonstrates the behaviors of the current role and the values, and does not have career aspirations, but is continually aligned with the work they're doing today. A high potential person, therefore, has the aspiration, the ability, and the engagement, and has already shown some of those things associated with future roles. A placement issue is simply a person who, even if they're getting the results, doesn't have the behaviors. A placement issue is somebody who's not getting the behaviors. Not getting the results. A placement issue might be somebody who does the right behaviors for the role, achieves the results, but doesn't talk positively about the organization or the department or the team they're on. That would be a performance issue. Now, here's one that's really important. And I learned this when I started doing many years ago 360 feedback. A person who's too early to tell is an individual who has not been in a direct reporting relationship with that specific manager for at least 180 days. If that person is in that relation for less than 180 days, there could be a lot of false information going back. The person might be struggling with something and the manager therefore doesn't think they're high potential. The person might think they're high potential when they're really not, because they are much better than the person they replaced. So I would suggest going through the high potential exercise is that anytime there's a relationship of less than 180 days, 90 minimum, that person is not in the consideration for a high potential. Do not use their previous manager, because the second that person leaves, again, there's a lot of misinformation. So first, you need to identify or measure their current performance. Here's the problem. There's great fiction written on resumes and performance reviews. And most organizations don't measure in their performance reviews, does the employee live the values? So you really need to teach managers when they're identifying somebody as high potential that they have to do a performance review, not on their current job, but on the high potential or the senior leadership behavioral profile and values, not simply on their current job, because they're not going to be built into their current job. Second, the manager has to understand, has this person been able to live the values of the organization? Have they learned from mistakes? Have they been engaged? Do they have the ability? Do they have the aspiration? I'll give you a few questions that managers can ask to get that information. Third, you conduct the gap analysis that I've talked about and identify, is the next level up the right move for this person? And in many organizations today, they're very flat. So people don't see their ability to change or to move on. And my feeling is there's a lot of cross learning. There's a lot of other jobs, either at the same level or even a level or two below them, that can really help them develop to be a better employee. So where can they have a development opportunity? And fourth, as a result of that analysis, are they high potential, a high performer, correctly placed, in need of development in their current role, or too early to tell? So here's how I look at it. And I know a lot of people use the 9 box, which is very confusing to me. Somebody who used to work with me always used to joke with my clients when we're doing certain things. And for us, we do a survey on how people were in the moment. And I'd always hesitate when it came to the math. And this individual would say, David's brilliant at a lot of things, but he is brain dead when it comes to math. That's why I don't do our family checkbook. There's a group of employees that you have that do not achieve the goals and don't demonstrate the behaviors. There are low end results. They don't have the behaviors. They are a placement issue. There's a group of employees you have that get results, live the competencies, live the values. They are deserving of recognition, which leaves us with the 2 difficult boxes. There's those people that live the behaviors of the organization, have the values, but aren't getting the results. You simply have to, because it's easier to teach skill and knowledge, rethink their fit to the job or give them the development they need, learning they need to be successful in the job. That's an easy fix. And long term, there will be a greater return on investment on those individuals. And then there's those that get the results, but violate the values, violate the behaviors. And you got to put at risk those things that are important to them. And you got to give them consequences if they don't change their actions. So what do we wind up with? We wind up with deadwood. Thanks for the memories, goodbye. Why do we keep these people in the organization? We have our stars. We have our keepers. Now, I call them keepers because Getting rid of a person who lives the values of the organization that people turn to for emotional support is akin to shooting Bambi's mother. You're going to lose credibility. If they can get rid of that person, they can easily get rid of me. And then there's your viruses. And how do you identify a virus? It's actually easy. It's Friday afternoon, a beautiful day. You want to go home. You made a commitment to see somebody early. And the phone rings on call display, a name comes up. Do you hesitate to answer that phone? If you hesitated to answer that phone thinking that you're going to be there extra time, blame for all the things, get sucked into doing extra work, that's a virus. Because you knew if a keeper called you, you'd probably answer it, explain to them quickly what's going on, pass them on to somebody else, and everybody's happy. If you can plot your organization, your people, along this grid, you can understand if they're high potential, placement issues, or correctly placed. It's a lot simpler than 9 boxes. So here's how you understand, does the person have the aspiration, ability, and engagement to be identified as a high performer or high potential? You need to focus on what's working well for that person. What would they like to do more frequently, and have a confidential conversation with them. One of the things which I always find annoying is that mid-year review has that little box of where do they aspire to be. That's not the time to have that conversation. Associating that with performance reviews gives the wrong message, because they're assuming that their performance review is dependent on them having aspiration, and it shouldn't be. Performance review should be dependent only on how are they currently performing in their current role. Once you identify that, you need to be able to notice and support things people are doing right. In other words, as Ken Blanchard said a long time ago, how do you catch people doing something right? Be appreciative of their contribution. These slides you can download, so I'm not going to go into these questions, but here are the kinds of questions that go into an appreciative conversation. And we did some follow-up research, some level 3 research after we've done this with a few organizations with the direct reports of the managers, and found that the level of commitment and engagement of those managers who did it actually went up. And when we asked the employees why, they said, because my manager never asked me before about how I feel about my job and my future. They never gave me the recognition of something they knew I was doing well, other than maybe at performance time when they have to do it. So just the very nature of getting your organization, and these are not questions that say, if you pass all these, you're high potential. All they're saying is, if you pass these, we can truly understand if you have aspiration for future jobs and where you want to be in the future. It could replace that, what do you want to be when you grow up question on mid-year reviews. So development activities we know should be not formal. And there's this myth out there of the 70-20-10 rule. That last one should be 10, not 20. Sorry about that. Have to correct that. And 10% of people learn through formal education. Now, here's the problem with this. This 70-20-10 has never been validated. It has never been proven as correct. And some people are very effective with learning. So if you do a learning styles inventory, I recommend the Honey Munford learning styles inventory, you will find out some people are actually theorists. And as theorists, this is the main way they're going to learn. They're going to learn through taking courses, reading, and discussing that with their other people in the organization. 20% of people, according to this theory, will develop through executive coaching, mentoring, and exposure. We also know that when high potential individuals have a direct mentoring relationship with a senior executive, their retention significantly increases because of that personal relationship. And then the 70% actually can do various activities as listed here that actually don't cost the organization really any money. one of the things that you can do, if the person is highly successful, highly talented at a certain aspect, don't have an outside trainer come in and teach the course. Don't have your learning and development people teach the course. They're too distant from those people that have to live that course. Have that high potential person lead the course. One of the gas utilities I worked with for many years, when you got to a director level, in order to show your capability and part of your development to be a more senior manager, is you had to volunteer in your community on a volunteer board. It could be the library, it could be the United Way, it could be anything that was a major visible contribution to the community, as long as you volunteered. And the theory behind that was you'll be exposed to budgeting, you'll be exposed to a lot of things that you otherwise would not be exposed to. And as a result of that, they would give at the end of every year of your participation, they would, in your name, give a $5,000 donation to that organization. So there's a lot of things that can be done that don't cost money. They don't have to go to a Harvard program that for 6 weeks costs $60,000. That's not going to be too effective. So really, this whole idea of the 70-20-10 rule is a myth. Everybody has a different approach to learning. A good manager will understand how that person has, in fact, acquired knowledge and applied that knowledge. Because acquiring the knowledge, if we look at this from a learning continuum, the only way I know that you've learned it successfully is if you can teach it well to somebody else. And so what talent champions do? Now, talent champions, in case anybody doesn't know what they are, talent champions are those frontline managers, those vice presidents, those executives, not in HR, that take under their wing employees who they always develop into future leaders. Talent champions are the people that your best people will gravitate to. So they meet and develop and execute an independent development plan, performance plan for people. They set goals with them. They share the requirements to be successful. They give them the learning opportunity. They give them, the training required, and they move them on to new roles and let them go. They focus on strengths while developing new capabilities and diminishing weaknesses. As an educator, this whole strength-based approach drives me nuts. For example, I'm not really good at math. It sure would help me if I was good at math. In the federal government in Canada, if you reach a certain position and you do not speak French, they will send you to the Netherlands of some small Quebec town that only speaks French, and you will go through an immersion program. So, they can focus on all the strengths they want, but if you don't have certain skill and knowledge, you're not going to make it. You don't have certain behaviors, you're not going to make it. And you can't hide what you don't know. Create opportunities to use these. Don't teach them the skill and knowledge. Don't give them a course or send them on a workshop, but you need to give them the opportunity to demonstrate that. And link their current plans and their future plans always to the business needs. We're not doing this to make you a better human being. We're not doing this to make you a better partner outside the company. We're doing this to make you a better employee to help us meet our future needs. Use a language that is common to people. One of the things that a lot of HR people have a problem with is they use jargon that nobody outside of HR or even inside HR knows. And they assess the individual for the development needs against those things that they actually need to develop. And what do talents do? They provide regular and honest feedback. A talent champion is probably having a 3-minute conversation, probably at least once every 2 weeks, on how that person's doing in the things they need to move forward. And they hold each other accountable. It's a two-way street. A talent champion also needs the person that they're working with to hold each other accountable, but they also need each other as talent champions to hold each other. And what did they do? Remember what I said, lateral development? Usually if you look at, succession planning, The imagery is always a ladder moving up. The British call this a climbing apparatus. I call it a jungle gym. I think that we have to re-implement this as a metaphor for succession planning. So here's just a summary of the things that you can do that don't cost money, but do help people grow in the organization. So in summary, real quickly, have the CEO and her team define who is a high potential in those criteria. Have the company values, clearly defined behaviors. Train your managers on how to measure behavior and understand those behaviors in the workplace. Hold peer meetings to challenge one another. In other words, if somebody's identifying somebody's a high potential and another manager disagrees, the manager identifying them should be able to give 3 or 4 anecdotal stories proving that person has the behavior they're talking about. Measure the high potential against the future roles, not their current role, not using performance reviews. And it's not past practice, it's just organizational best practice. In other words, there are no such thing as best practices. Every organization is unique, and there are common practices out there, but the application often has to be modified internally.
All right, so what you'll hear about next is how technology can support your succession planning. You'll get a sense for a lot of the things that David mentioned, how you can use some of those things, or how technology can be used to take some of the things that David said, especially around the complexity of math and how many of us don't enjoy all of the math. Technology can take all of that and help organizations to run better succession planning processes. It helps by standardizing. If you understand the requirements for particular positions that need to be filled, once your senior positions, your key positions are identified, a piece of technology and an application can take all of that and standardize how you evaluate your existing employees against those requirements. It can extend throughout the organization, so succession planning doesn't have to be limited to an elite group of individuals. Anyone and everyone in your organization can participate in succession planning. It allows organizations using technology to have a single holistic data set. It's one version of the reality where key positions, requirements are clearly identified, clearly communicated, and then employees who show an interest in a certain position can be compared against those requirements. Everyone is held to the same standard, and applications can help you identify who best fits by churning all of the numbers and doing all of the math, can easily identify who the best fit individuals are for those key positions. Having a solution, having an application can also make talent and leadership pools easily visible. And in some of the slides that will follow, you will see some snapshots of how technology can present pools to an organization as a whole. So what you see here is, after understanding the requirements and doing some of the evaluations, the application can easily present to senior management who and how many people best fit into some of the quadrants that David mentioned on some of the earlier slides. So at a glance, an organization can see, I'm doing all right. I've got people that, maybe need some work, people who certainly can fill the role of successors. Again, all of this is done based on positions. So it's a position-centric view of who might best fit and how many people could possibly fit certain roles. So that's just one generic view. Expanding on that view, just looking at one of those quadrants, so the top right quadrant would give an organization senior leadership an idea of who the individuals are and how they how they perform on certain aspects that are important to the organization, like how likely are they to leave, how competent are they in their jobs, what's their leadership potential like, and how are they performing in their current role. And applications can also help you predict, using predictive analytics, how people might be performing in future roles. So again, this is just one of those views that using technology can help you at a glance see who best fits and how they fit. Where technology also adds value is it can lend a sense of engagement, or have the employees feel more engaged in their career. They can take ownership of their future. Technology like this allows the employees to identify where they might want to get to in the future, allows them understanding what the requirements are, understanding what their current capabilities are, what are their learning gaps, where should they be focused on, what should they be working on. Applications allow employees to take ownership and manage their own development plans. What applications also allow you to do is not wait and once a year do evaluations and get feedback and have the employees tell you how they're feeling about their job and the organization and how things are going and their managers and all of that good stuff. But applications allow you to get real-time updates and information back that is then all used in part of the data churn inside of the application to present an organization with information about how people are doing, how they're feeling, are they unhappy, are they engaged. This is where application can easily help make it not cumbersome, but make it rather easy to get this information on a real-time, regular basis. So that was just a fly through what an application can do. However, just in summary then, succession planning applications do help you to future-proof your organizations by understanding what your critical roles are and who could potentially be your key successors. They're easily identified. It's all data-driven. It helps organizations make quality decisions because you have real-time, consistent information. Takes a lot of subjectivity out of knowing who might best fit and on what kind of time frames. You have some data-based information. Certainly, applications do help reduce the time to fill critical roles because you have a real-time, ongoing, running idea of who can fit these roles, how much lead time, how much more training do they need. All of that information is easily obtained using applications. And what they can also do is really highlight for an organization when they should start recruiting, because if those boxes are empty and you don't have key performers that can fill the roles that are critical to your organization, it certainly tells you way ahead of time that you should start recruiting and that you've got gaps to fill and you can't fill them with your existing employee complement. So that's why applications like succession planning applications can certainly help improve your business process, your process to fill key roles in your organization. And then if anyone has any additional questions, we'll leave our information up there on the screen for a bit. There's email addresses, there are phone numbers. Feel free to contact either David or myself, Sherry, if you have any questions at all, if we can provide you with any information, if we can help you through any of your succession planning challenges, we would be more than happy to help. All right, well, we'll leave this information up for a little bit longer. We hope to hear from you.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.